Usually when someone gives us feedback, there is this expectation that we're going to respond like totally rational, emotionally mature adults. You nod thoughtfully, you take mental notes, you say, "Thank you for letting me know."
Right, yeah, the ideal scenario. Calm, collected, and, completely open to constructive criticism, whether it's from a partner, a colleague, or a friend.
But then someone actually points out, like, a minor oversight in a project you managed, or they suggest a different way you could have handled a delicate conversation.
And suddenly your heart is just pounding.
Yes, you're sweating. You are ready to go to absolute war over a completely mundane detail.
It is the ultimate gap between how we want to act and how we actually react in the moment. I mean, we think of ourselves as reasonable people.
Right.
Yet we find ourselves aggressively defending our actions over something that objectively just isn't a big deal at all.
And that brings us to the topic of today's deep dive. We are talking about defensiveness. It is the universal human reaction, and honestly, it is the ultimate blocker of emotional intelligence and relational repair.
Oh, without a doubt. It really is.
Today, we are pulling together some incredible insights from clinical therapy practices, grounded theory research out of Brigham Young University, Dr. John Gottman's renowned relationship labs, and a few deep dives into the mechanics of emotional intelligence.
It's a really comprehensive look at a behavior we all engage in, even if we desperately want to pretend we don't. Defensiveness is practically a universal reflex.
Exactly. So our mission for you today is to explore exactly what defensiveness is, how it secretly sabotages us across a really sneaky spectrum of behaviors, what vulnerabilities it's so desperately trying to protect, and most importantly, how learning to disarm it can completely transform your relationships. Okay, let's unpack this.
Do it.
Before we can stop being defensive, you have to understand why our bodies react so intensely to simple everyday feedback. It seems completely disproportionate.
Well, it does seem disproportionate until you look at it through the lens of evolution. Defensiveness is, at its root, fundamentally about self-preservation.
Like caveman stuff.
Exactly, caveman stuff. If you go back to our ancestors, the biggest threats to survival were strictly physical, right? Wild animals, rival tribes, harsh environmental dangers.
So the human brain evolved an alarm system.
An incredibly efficient biological alarm system to keep us alive. We learned to hide, to climb trees, to throw rocks, to fight back with lethal force when we were cornered.
But I mean, fast forward to the 21st century. Most of us aren't living under the daily threat of being chased by a predator. Our physical environment is relatively safe, but that alarm system is still active.
Yeah, and today our biggest threats are emotional or social. And our biology simply hasn't caught up to our modern reality.
It's just lagging behind.
Seriously lagging. The brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, cannot easily distinguish between a physical attack on your life and, say, a verbal critique of your character.
Wow, that is wild.
Yeah, the BYU Grounded Theory study explores this concept called DPA, which stands for diffuse physiological arousal. When someone gives you feedback that feels critical, your amygdala essentially hijacks your prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is the logical, reasoning, empathetic part of the brain, right?
Yeah.
So when that gets hijacked, all logic just goes completely out the window.
Entirely. You are thrown straight into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And this isn't just a metaphor or like a mental state. It is a highly physical neurological cascade.
Adrenaline and cortisol just flood your system.
Exactly. You might feel a sudden heat flush in your face or your chest. Your jaw tightens. Your breathing becomes shallow and rapid to oxygenate your muscles for an actual physical fight.
Oh, wow.
You might find your vision narrowing or catch yourself physically crossing your arms to protect your vital organs.
It's like having an overactive smoke detector in your brain. You're just burning toast. Someone is giving you mild everyday feedback about a shared calendar.
Yeah.
But your body reacts like the whole house is on fire and the roof is caving in.
Yes.
You're deploying the fire hoses for a toaster.
That is a brilliant way to visualize DPA. And the crucial thing to understand here is that when you are in that hijacked state, you literally cannot process new information. Your auditory processing actually changes.
Your hearing physically changes.
It does. You cannot listen empathetically because your only biological imperative in that split second is to neutralize a mortal threat.
Okay, so if defensiveness is this intense, full-body biological reaction, it makes sense why it doesn't always look like a dramatic shouting match.
Yeah.
I feel like we tend to picture defensiveness as aggressive yelling or door slamming.
Right, but it rarely looks like a cinematic fight. Defensiveness exists on a continuum.
Because it's a sneaky spectrum of behaviors.
Very sneaky. On the mild end of the spectrum, it can look like quietly shutting down.
Hmm.
You might change the subject, suddenly become very interested in your phone, or just do an internal eye roll.
Right.
It's a subtle, passive deflection. You are fleeing the emotional threat.
Then you have the middle of the spectrum, which I suspect is where a vast majority of us live on a daily basis. This is where you see the over-justifying of actions, making endless excuses, or counter-criticizing.
Ah, the classic whataboutism.
Yes. Let's say your partner mentions that you've been working late a lot recently and they feel disconnected from you. A middle-spectrum defensive response is instantly snapping back with, well, I'm working this hard to pay for the vacation you wanted.
Or what about last month when you went out with your friends 3 nights a week?
Right. You're immediately turning the spotlight back onto them to relieve the pressure on yourself.
And then, of course, you have the intense end of the spectrum. This involves loud denials, moral outrage, gaslighting the other person by telling them their reality is wrong, or stonewalling.
Stonewalling being, like, completely withdrawing.
Yeah, completely withdrawing, turning to stone, and refusing to interact at all. Dr. Karen Sofer, a clinical psychologist who writes a lot about this, describes defensiveness as disguising our pain.
Like a wounded animal trying to hide its vulnerabilities so it doesn't become a target for a predator.
Precisely. And she lists these highly specific, covert tactics we use. Things like litigating and relitigating the timeline of an interaction.
Oh, or bringing up completely unrelated past transgressions just to muddy the waters of the current issue.
Right. She also highlights getting overly analytical and intellectualized as one of the most common covert defensive tactics, especially in professional environments or among highly educated couples.
Okay, wait. I have to push back on that one. Getting super intellectual and analyzing the facts is defensive. I thought that was just being logical and trying to solve the problem objectively. How is relying on facts a bad thing?
It's a trap so many of us fall into. What's
Okay.
fascinating here is that when you unilaterally shift an emotional conflict into a purely intellectual debate, you are weaponizing details to deflect from emotional vulnerability.
Huh.
Think about it. If a colleague says, I felt really undermined in that meeting when you talked over me, and you pull out the meeting agenda to litigate the exact timestamps of who had the floor.
And point out that technically it was an open forum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You aren't being logical. You are using intellect as a shield so you don't have to face the discomfort of knowing you made someone feel small.
Wow, you're completely invalidating their emotional experience by treating the relationship like a courtroom deposition. You might win the argument on a technicality, but you destroy the trust.
Precisely. Dr. John Gottman's research points out that these tactics generally fall into two main categories. The counterattack, where you go on the offensive.
Or playing the innocent victim.
Right, where you use whining and exaggerated helplessness, saying things like, I guess I can just never do anything right. I'm such a terrible person.
Which forces the other person to stop criticizing you and start comforting you instead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's incredibly manipulative, even if it's subconscious.
So what does this all mean? If both the counterattack and playing the victim are just sophisticated ways of deflecting responsibility, what are we so terrified of taking responsibility FOR? Now that we know how we deflect, we need to look at what exactly is underneath all this armor.
To understand the root of the armor, we have to look at the internal mechanism called the flaw cycle. The researchers, Stamp, Vangelisti, and Daly, identified a fascinating four-step sequence that explains exactly what has to happen inside our minds for a defensive response to be triggered.
Because it doesn't just happen randomly. Walk us through that sequence, because I think this is where the puzzle really comes together.
Okay, so the first step is that there is a self-perceived flaw that you harbor secretly, something you do not want to admit about yourself. The second step is that you have a deep underlying sensitivity to that specific flaw.
So, for example, let's say you secretly worry that you aren't advancing fast enough in your career and you feel really insecure about your earning potential compared to your peers. That's the flaw in the sensitivity.
Yes. Then comes step 3. You perceive an attack by another person. And step 4 is that the perceived attack focuses on that exact hidden flaw.
Ah, okay. So your partner might innocently say, hey, we should probably sit down and look at our budget for next year. They're just talking about finances.
But because of your internal flaw cycle, your brain skips right past the literal words and hears, you aren't making enough money, you are failing as a provider.
And boom, the amygdala fires, the DPA spikes, and you counterattack.
Right, because if someone criticizes you for something you are completely confident about, say, They tell you your handwriting is messy, and you know it is, and you don't care, you don't get defensive.
Defensiveness only flares up when the feedback hits a nerve, when it touches on an insecurity you were already terrified might be true.
Exactly. Defensiveness exists to protect an incredibly fragile ego. At its absolute core, the biological armor guards a deep-seated, terrifying belief. If I am wrong or if I am fundamentally flawed, I will be abandoned.
It is the fear of being unlovable.
It really is.
So if our defensiveness is essentially a map to our own insecurities, how did we get so hypervigilant in the first place? How do we stop projecting that past trauma onto the people around us right now?
Often, it maps back to our earliest environments. The BYU study cites research showing that if you grew up in a family system with high levels of defensiveness, or if you experienced childhood trauma, emotional neglect, or hypercritical parenting, you naturally develop a baseline of hypervigilance.
You learn very early on that making mistakes is dangerous.
You do. You learn that criticism is not an opportunity for growth. It is a profound threat to your safety and belonging that must be fought off at all costs.
It's like an emotional autoimmune disease. Your brain is trying so hard to protect you from past trauma that it starts attacking the healthy people in your present life.
That's a great way to put it. And the relational cost of projecting that past pain onto our current partners or colleagues is staggering. It destroys intimacy.
Dr. John Gottman notoriously categorized defensiveness as one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for relationships.
He did. After studying couples longitudinally for decades, along with criticism, contempt, and stonewalling, chronic defensiveness is a massive, mathematically proven predictor of relationship dissolution and divorce.
Because, as Gottman notes, defensiveness is ultimately a mechanism of blame. When you make excuses or counterattack, the subtext is always, the problem isn't me, it's you.
It completely blocks any attempt at teamwork. The person giving the feedback is left feeling unheard, invalidated, and like they are talking to a brick wall.
But there is a very dangerous trap on the flip side of this equation that we have to discuss. If attacking back destroys the relationship, a lot of people think the solution is just to surrender.
To say, you're right, I'm terrible, it's all my fault, just to make the conflict stop.
Right, avoiding the fight by just absorbing the blow. But the grounded theory research from BYU introduces a critical nuance here, the concept of deception to placate, which is also known as over-responsibility.
And this is arguably one of the most counterintuitive parts of human conflict. It is deeply counterintuitive and incredibly damaging.
So taking all the blame just to keep the peace is actually bad.
Yes, taking all the blame or faking accountability to end an argument quickly is actually a highly toxic dynamic. In the qualitative interviews from the BYU study, participants revealed that this kind of over-responsibility almost always stems from a profound lack of emotional safety in the relationship.
They are essentially playing dead to survive the interaction. They feel like if they try to stand up for themselves, express a boundary, or explain their perspective, they will be punished emotionally or verbally.
So they bypass their own reality and just absorb the blame. And while that might stop the immediate fight and lower the temperature in the room for an hour, it fundamentally erodes the individual's sense of self.
It builds a massive power imbalance.
Absolutely. The person taking the blame starts to build intense, silent resentment. And as clinical researchers at Carolina Counseling Services point out, this pattern of chronic, unresolved conflict and placation leads to deep loneliness, isolation, and anxiety.
You are in a relationship, but you are completely alone because you aren't allowed to exist authentically.
Exactly.
It sounds like taking all the blame just to stop an argument is like putting a bucket under a leaky roof instead of fixing the hole.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
It keeps the floor dry for a minute and maybe everyone calms down, but the storm is still actively rotting the structural wood of your house. You aren't solving anything. You are just managing the optics of the disaster.
That is exactly what it is. Genuine accountability requires mutual respect. It requires a baseline of safety where both people can be flawed without being threatened. You cannot achieve relational repair if one person is constantly falling on their sword just to avoid a blowout.
So if counterattacking destroys a relationship by blaming the other person, and taking all the blame is a toxic survival mechanism that destroys your own mental health, it seems like the only way out is finding a way to stay in the intense discomfort of being wrong. What is the actual healthy middle ground here?
According to Gottman's extensive clinical research, the antidote to defensiveness is to take an accurate amount of responsibility for even a small part of the problem.
Right. Not all of it, not none of it, just the part that you actually own.
Yeah.
Let's look at a workplace example. Say your manager pulls you aside and says, "You missed a really critical slide in the presentation today." and it made the whole team look unprepared in front of the client,
A defensive response would be deflecting, like, well, the data team didn't give me the numbers until 5 p.m. yesterday. I didn't have time.
which completely ignores your role in the outcome and just passes the buck.
Exactly.
But the antidote response would be, "You're right, I did miss that slide. I should have flagged to you yesterday evening that I was running out of time to integrate the data rather than just hoping it wouldn't come up. I'll make sure to communicate earlier next time."
You aren't saying I'm an incompetent employee, but you are saying I dropped the ball on this specific communication, and here is how I will fix it.
But taking that accurate responsibility raises an enormous practical question. How do we actually force our brains to formulate that mature, measured response when our heart is pounding, our amygdala is hijacked, and our biology is screaming at us to fight for our lives?
You have to hack your own biology.
How do you do that?
The sources outline some very practical emotional intelligence moves to accomplish this. The first and absolutely most crucial step is self-soothing. You have to lower your diffuse physiological arousal before you attempt to resolve the conflict.
Right, because you literally can't think straight.
Right. Gottman suggests taking a mutually agreed upon time out. You literally need to wait for your prefrontal cortex to come back online.
And the therapy insights suggest that we need to start noticing the physical spike in our bodies as an early warning sign. You have to become an observer of your own biology.
Yes. When you feel your jaw clench or your vision narrow or your chest get hot, that is your cue. Instead of preparing your brilliant verbal defense, you pause.
You can even say out loud, "I notice I'm feeling really defensive right now. I want to hear you, but I need 20 minutes to process this before we keep talking."
Naming the feeling is incredibly powerful because it strips it of its subconscious control over you. And then, from a cognitive standpoint, during that 20-minute break, you have to actively practice separating the feedback from your inherent value as a human being.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially for you listening right now. Think about how empowering it is to cleanly separate your self-worth from a simple mistake.
It is so freeing.
When you remind yourself that being wrong about a task or missing a deadline or hurting a partner's feelings in a moment of stress does not mean you are fundamentally unlovable or broken, it completely diffuses the biological threat.
You no longer need the armor because your identity isn't under attack.
Exactly. This single shift in mindset can immediately change the temperature of your entire life.
It changes everything.
Yeah.
And the BYU study highlights the power of what they call apologetic communication and repair attempts. When we can step back, self-soothe our biology, remind ourselves of our worth, and then approach our partner to say,
"Hey, I reacted defensively earlier because I was feeling really overwhelmed and insecure, but I love you, and I want to hear what you were trying to tell me."
yes, it bridges the gap. It moves us from a posture of rigid self-protection back into a posture of vulnerable connection.
And connection, at the end of the day, is the entire point. So, to bring all of this together for you, defensiveness is, at its core, a biological shield. It's an evolutionary leftover designed to keep us alive, but today it is merely trying to protect our deepest insecurities and our fragile egos from emotional harm.
It exists on a wide, highly nuanced spectrum, everything from quietly checking out of a conversation to weaponizing intellectual facts to aggressively counterattacking.
And it costs us dearly, blocking repair and predicting the end of our relationships. But the antidote is entirely within our control. By learning to self-soothe our physical reactions, by noticing our internal triggers, and by taking accurate, realistic accountability for our small part of the mess, we can disarm the alarm system.
It's challenging work requiring a lot of self-awareness, but it is precisely the kind of work that saves relationships and builds true emotional resilience.
It absolutely is. And to close out today's deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on this idea of the defensive shield. We spend so much time and energy thinking about how our defensiveness protects us from being hurt.
We focus entirely on the safety of the armor.
But have you ever considered what happens to the person on the other side? If your defensiveness is a heavy, spiked iron shield, what happens when you accidentally bash the people you love most with it every time you turn around?
Oh, wow.
True emotional intelligence isn't just about figuring out how to cautiously drop the shield. It's realizing that in a healthy relationship, you were never actually on a battlefield to begin with.
That is a profoundly important perspective to carry forward.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, take care of yourselves and maybe take a slow, deep breath before you respond to that next piece of feedback.